Hello, 111 students. I hope you're all doing well. We are so close to the end of the semester. This is the first video 1 of 2 videos on memory. Let me see, make sure you can hear me. And I am really happy that you're here. So for this video lecture, we're going to go over the 3 stages of memory. And I'll also be explaining what consolidation is, the process of consolidation, because it's important in it's important to our memory function or effective memory function. You may want your textbooks out. This chapter of your textbook does speak on many different terms and ideas that I'm going to be bringing up in both video 1 and video 2 of this lecture series. But it was difficult for me to put page numbers on the slides because your book repeats these terms and ideas in several places in the chapters. So I've done the best that I can, and it will be helpful if you can follow along in your book to find many of these ideas. Now, I'm going to tell you the 3 stages of memory are discussed at the beginning of the chapter. I do have page numbers for that, but going into depth on these stages is not in your textbook. So this is why I'm doing a lecture on it. You will need a paper and a pen to take notes, and I'm just going to give you an overview of a class activity for video 1 that I do on memory to give you a sense of how these terms and ideas actually function, what they look like in action. Okay, so to review, in our previous lecture for study reading, we talked about the 3 steps of muscle reading. Okay, and from there we discussed THIEVES. Now remember that THIEVES is an acronym for for a method for previewing. Okay, so we use THIEVES to remind us of what we're looking at when we preview a reading. And then we talked about why previewing was important and effective, what a student does while reading and after reading, and you can please remember or take note of that while reading, we are both flagging answers to the questions we posed during preview, but also very important is the check-in with ourselves, with our understanding, with our physicality, with our bodies, and with our environments. So this is a really important concept. We're checking to make sure we understood what we read and gathered all the main ideas. And then we check in with our bodies and make sure that we have enough, we drank enough water, that we're not, asking ourselves, am I tired? Do I need to stop? Do I need a snack? Am I laying down? What's my posture like? And then checking the environment. Do I have enough light? Is it quiet enough? So that we can be aware of how we're choosing to do our readings. And then we also talked about roadblocks to readings, and you made a list of some of the roadblocks to reading in your personal experience, and your book gives you some tools, as does the lecture, for how to get around that. Same with tough vocabulary. I gave you several methods for what to do when you encounter tough vocabulary in your text, in your whatever you're reading. So do remember that the review slides for every lecture and the objective slides, what you are learning this week, that both of those slides are very useful when studying for your tests. They should help give you some direction on what to put on your study guides, or at least you can self-test to make sure that you understand all of that's listed in the objective and in the review slides. Okay, now I want you to take a minute. You can pause the video to answer these 3 questions. What does memory mean to you, and how do you define it? And I don't mean give me the textbook definition, but your own definition. What do you help, or how do you help yourself remember? What are some of the techniques that you use personally or regularly? And then think back to a time when you couldn't remember something important, and give some reasons for why you couldn't remember in the moment. When you're finished, you can unpause the video and we'll move along. Okay, welcome back. You should have done your quick write. Many students gave several techniques, such as note cards or using their calendars and checking their calendars. But we're going to go a little bit more into depth here. So, memory, your book explains that memory is an active process. It is not a stable object, a thing. Okay, it's an action. It's moving, changing all the time. Your book also explains that as you're learning, your brain is changing, and it's changing form, and it's changing the way it processes. So the brain is in a constant state of change. So memory is as well, as we're learning new things. And on page 113 to 114 of your textbook in Becoming a Master's Student, the process of memory, or the 3 stages of memory, is it's not really explained, but it's introduced. So encoding would be the first stage. From encoding, we move to storage, and from storage, we move to recall. And while in between each of these stages, and all the while, there's a process happening called consolidation. And consolidation is a process that makes our memories more stable. It solidifies them. It makes them more able to stay in our memories. Or stay in our memory banks, I should say. So the first stage is called encoding, and this is when we perceive an event or information through our senses, meaning this is when we are very first introduced to new information, experience. I mean, it could be anything and everything. So even as you're listening to this lecture now, if a car alarm starts to go off in the background in your neighborhood or wherever you are, your attention is going to be drawn to that thing, that experience, that noise. Your senses are being tapped, okay? And so our focus then moves with encoding. What we put our attention and focus on, we are encoding. We are responding to in some way. So this is why we talked about setting intentions when you come to class, and being intentional about studying, and being self-aware. Because one of the main stages of strengthening our memory, or making sure that memories stay when they need to stay, is that we need to have a successful encoding process. This means we need to put all of our attention and focus on whatever it is that we really need to remember, what we intend to remember for later. During the encoding process, and as information is literally coming into contact with our senses, with our bodies, neurons are firing. Oh, excuse me. Neurons are firing in the brain. And they are, what's being fired is information. Your brain wants to get information from one part of the brain to another part of the brain, and neurons are getting really excited with this prospect, and trying to send this information. also during encoding, our emotions increase. And as our emotions increase, more neurons fire. If we really want to get our neurons firing so that information is starting to, float around and we really want to learn something, we just have to increase our emotions. Now, this doesn't mean stress or overwhelm. I'm talking about maybe an emotional memory that we may have that links to whatever new information is coming into our senses. And there you go. There are your neurons firing right now as you watch this lecture. Mine too. Okay, and that's important because that's really what your brain looks like as you're learning new information if you were to be hooked up on one of those crazy neuroscience machines. And also encoding acts as a filter system so that not everything that you're taking in is being sent to short-term memory. We can't possibly hold everything that our senses pick up at all times. There's just too much stimulation for that. So filtration needs to happen. And anything that is unimportant is going to be eliminated before moving on to storage. Okay, now there are 4 types of encoding. There's acoustic encoding, visual encoding, tactile, which means something is coming into contact with your body or you are touching something new or having a new learning experience. And then semantic. Semantic is about meaning. Semantic is learning, is a type of encoding that is conceptual. It's like the example here is understanding how to put words together to form a sentence. This means that you would have to know what a word means and how to use the word in order to string several of them together to create a sentence. So there is some level of understanding of each word, their meaning, and how they're used in order to create a sentence, right? Verbally, in language. Or this is a really good example, recognizing the names of colors. If you can remember back in elementary school when you learned the names of colors, what were some of the ways that you learned colors? Give you a few seconds there to think about that. Many of my students said, well, we looked at objects that had colors. And I said, great. What did you learn about the color red? What was the example used for the color red? And everyone in the class said, apples. So just like A is for apple or an apple is red, we need to understand what apple is in the first place before we're going to learn what a color is. So there is some level of understanding when we are learning a new concept. There is a level of understanding, some kind of context for red to be applied to, for us to even understand red. Okay, I know that's a little confusing. You can always look up more information on semantic meanings or semantic memory. There's a lot of good information out there. I know because I brush up on it because new science is always coming out. Important with the 4 types of encoding is that visual and semantic are the 2 strongest types of encoding. So if you're trying to remember something, visualizing something, seeing it either in front of you or seeing new information or learning something new through sight, or visualizing in your mind's eye, as well as maybe applying a new concept to one that already exists for you in your brain, something that you've already learned, prior knowledge. Combining these 2 things is going to be the strongest way of encoding information and ensuring that it moves through the short-term and long-term memory process or stages. Now, we're going to return to this idea later on in the lecture, so particularly in lecture 2. So don't worry too much if you are not understanding how this applies or how it will be used while you're studying or in a lecture. Okay, now the process of consolidation, again, is happening at all times. Consolidation happens when you're sleeping, when you're resting, when you're allowing your brain to relax. There's mention of it very briefly on page 124 of your textbook, but it's not enough to really understand the true power of consolidation. So during the consolidation process, pathways in the brain are being created. So remember, those neurons are firing, saying, hey, there's new stuff coming. There's new information. Get ready. We're going to be spreading this information and delivering it. It's like a mail delivery system to where the information needs to go. So consolidation creates the pathways for the information to travel from one side of the brain to the other. And these neurons are the ones that are transmitting the information. They're basically the speakers from one to the next, letting each other know what's coming. And these pathways, if we have an existing pathway, meaning if we have learned something, we have prior knowledge, for instance, the apple, okay? If we say we've already learned what apple is and what apple means, it's a fruit, and I eat it to stay healthy, and I like it without the skin, like we totally understand what apple is. When we're learning the color red as a new bit of information and neurons are firing, we're creating a new pathway for the color red, to enter and find its way to an important part of the brain. If there's an existing pathway, this new pathway will connect to the existing one. And that's what we really want, because the more connections that we have in the brain, the more we can use our prior knowledge and what we've already learned, not as a way to say we don't need to learn this again or we don't need new information, but we're using it as a magnet to draw in this new information. Whatever is new will stay. These strong pathways, the more that we have them, the more connections that are made from prior knowledge to new information, the stronger the pathways get. Now imagine a single-laned highway and a double-laned highway coming together and creating a much wider, stronger pathway for later information to travel on. This means that the more that we learn, the better we learn, the more efficient learners we are, the more we are capable of learning. So as you go through college, it may be really tiresome now, and of course it is, and I'm going to explain why you're so tired as you're learning new information. But this process is really tiring because you're learning a lot of new concepts. I know when I was in college and a lot of the stuff that I had carried with me most of my life, the belief systems, the what I thought I knew was fact, was put into question in college because there were so many new theories and so many new practices, and I was introduced to so many ideas that all the old stuff was decaying and was old, and I really felt like I was challenged at learning. I thought I was really slow, and something might be wrong with my brain function. But what's really happening is that you are creating these really strong pathways in your brain, and later when you're finished with college, you're going to look back and notice how things got easier. Okay, they got easier for you because as you were learning and using these tools, the the learning becomes almost second nature. So this is when students in a community college are writing, they're going from writing 3-page papers, sometimes 5-page papers. And when I tell them I wrote 10-page papers as an undergrad or at university or later on in grad school, 25-page papers, they're blown away. And a lot of them are discouraged because they're like, how did you write that much? It gets easier. It definitely gets easier as you continue learning. So stick with it. Also, during the consolidation process, just like I was saying with Apple, if we've previously learned what Apple is, that means we're going to pull it up out of the memory bank because it was already stored in our long-term memory banks. And we're going to pull that up so that a new piece of information can connect to it. And once that new information connects to it, like the color red, we put both of them back into storage for later, and then they're reconsolidated. The process starts again with the new information, and we end up strengthening what we know. So the more that we recall what we know, the more that we visit our prior knowledge, what we've learned in the past, in order to connect it to new information, we are strengthening always over and over. The more we recall, the more we're strengthening our memory concerning these topics, whatever information we're learning. Okay, so now another really important part of consolidation is sleep. So we talked about in the previous slide how your brain is forming new pathways, and this could be very exhausting. Your brain is exercising, and it's exercising a lot as you go to new classes. So feeling more tired, maybe physically drained, maybe mentally drained, is very normal. And it can affect our attitudes. It can affect our moods. So our motivation levels may go down. Our attitude towards this long-term commitment we've made at college can struggle, can be affected. Our attitudes in class towards our classmates and our teachers can be affected. So it's really important that we rest when we need to rest and that we sleep when we need to sleep. During sleep, sleep consolidates memories, or what's happening in our memory banks, what new information we've brought in. It happens naturally. You don't have to do anything at all, because your brain is going over what throughout the day on its own. So in some ways, going to sleep is actually going back to work. You can call sleeping studying in some ways, because you're solidifying this new information in your brain by resting. And then another part of consolidation, this meme is kind of, or GIF, sorry, is showing um, this idea, and we'll talk more about this in video number 2, that as you sleep, the brain cells, if we're stressed and we're exhausted, brain cells may be touching one another. And as they rub up against each other, no fluid can go through between those brain cells. And that fluid is what's, allowing information to flow between cells. Now, if we rest and relax, so do our brain cells. They rest and relax as well, which means there's space that's created between them so that brain fluid can flow through the brain and wash out toxins and things that are stuck, that are built up. Now, if we don't get enough sleep, toxins are built in the brain. There are many ways to clean our brains, but sleep is a huge one. It regenerates itself just like our skin does. And we want to make sure that as we're sleeping, because if we're not, those toxins create moods, create our experiences as well, and we may not be looking at whatever task or um, learning experience with clear vision because of this. So sleep, very important to consolidation. All right, now the second stage of memory is storage. And storage is really just keeping information. It's taking information and putting it into the short-term memory bank, which is also called the working memory or the long-term memory bank. We will talk more about specifically long-term memory in video number 2. This is just a brief overview. So long-term memory, so your short-term memory acts as a filter to your long-term memory. Okay, so this is another filtration system. Your long-term memory, what's the best way to move information from the short-term to the long-term memory? It's to repeat information. Repetition really helps. So some students said when they were learning colors or the alphabet, they learned songs, because songs can be repeated and repeated and repeated, and then that information is moved very easily actually into the long-term memory. Again, linking any prior knowledge to any new information that's coming in is going to definitely help store that new information to the previously stored information. And with the short-term memory, a couple of things to keep in mind is that short-term memory, also called the brain's post-it note, which I'm not sure where I got that, but it's a good way of looking at it. The short-term memory holds less than 10 items, about roughly. For the sake of our class and tests, we're going to say less than 10. Different studies, it varies just a little bit, but we'll say 10. And if you do the activity video that goes along with this lecture after all the lecture's over, I think I say 15 or so, but please stick with this lecture. It holds less than 10 items. And it holds these items for about 10 to 15 seconds. Unless we do something with the information, it's going to leave our short-term memory without any effort at all. So we need to act on this new information very quickly. Repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, link it to previous knowledge, do something in order to get our information to the long-term memory bank, because of course the short-term memory is necessary. This is necessary, just as encoding is necessary. I mean, could you imagine if we could remember everything that we saw for all of our short-term memories? It would be insane. Okay, so the last stage of memory is called recall or retrieval. And this is the act of grabbing any information that has been previously encoded and already stored. So we're retrieving it to use it or to access it. It's important to remember that information is stored all over the brain and not just in one place. It's in different places. So memory retrieval is us trying to revisit the pathway that information took in order from encoding to storage in order for it to remain in our long-term memories. So what this means is the pathway, when we encoded, for instance, the color red, and we had attached the color red to our knowledge of apple in our brain, it's much easier to find that pathway because there was something that was already stored in our brains that can link to new information. So this can be very difficult for students who cram or study before an exam. What it may look like is they're taking the test and they know they've seen a term and they know that they studied it, but they cannot access the meaning or they can't find the right answer. And the reason is because there are a couple of different reasons why cramming doesn't work, and I'll go over that a couple of times in this lecture. Make sure you hear it. Is that when you are cramming, or when the student was cramming, they, first of all, may not have been encoding properly, where they were setting their intention and attention on every single piece of information that was coming in. And then um, they also can't find that pathway because if they weren't, if they had no prior knowledge, if they hadn't been exposed to the material and really been reviewing it a little bit every day or a couple of times a week, in order for the study session right before the test to, um, I guess, to set the stage for uh, for the studying for the information that they're studying to stick. They're just not going to remember where the information went because they can't find the pathway. Okay. And I know this is really conceptual, but it's actually happening. It's very much happening. We just, you know, it's more of a sensory thing than it is a visual thing. So um, just remember that the stronger the pathways, the the quicker we can recall information, which means accessing prior knowledge or repetition. There's another one, chunking our learning into smaller pieces and then repeating or setting our focus on those small pieces, one at a time. This is how we are going to be able to retrieve memories better, or more effectively later. Um, Once we recall or a bit of information that we need, it goes back into the long-term memory. It is again reconsolidated and it's stronger. If you're curious about uh, learning more about this process, you can check out this link. Otherwise, there's plenty of information for you on the internet and credible sources as well. Okay, now the activity, I want to mention, I'm so sorry, but I want to mention one thing about these stronger pathways because I'm a little concerned. It's okay if I repeat it later, but what I want to get across is that we don't always cram and we still don't remember the information on tests. And that might be your experience. And there are a couple of reasons for this. If you didn't cram, you studied, you chunked your material a little bit every day, you reviewed every day or every couple of days prior leading up to a test, and you feel that you studied well but didn't do well on the test. One reason is because of anxiety. There could be a lot of anxiety or feeling overwhelmed or pressure. And remember, that does not allow brain fluid to flow freely. It doesn't allow um, the information to get from one side of the brain to the other in order for you to access it. You won't be able to find these pathways. So, calming yourself is very important if you experience test anxiety or you have memory blockages. Another reason could be sleep. Again, not getting enough sleep, it makes it very difficult for us to access information because um, the consolidation process isn't as strong, or we just haven't, like, we're physically drained to try and go through those paths, find the pathways and all. Because remember, the brain is exercising and it's a muscle and it really needs to rest and it needs brain food and everything that your abs and your biceps and the rest of your body needs, your brain needs because it is literally the computer of our whole systems. Okay, that's enough lecture on that. So with the activity, what I had students do is that I had a very complicated drawing and I posted it, and they looked at the drawing for 90 seconds without drawing anything. They were just looking and fully focused at the picture. After 90 seconds, I gave them 90 seconds to draw the picture from memory. This was really interesting because the second round, I broke up that one drawing, the first drawing, I broke it up into 4 pieces, smaller pieces. And I hung each one up, and each one was hung for 30 seconds, and students observed the picture, and then they were given 30 seconds to draw the picture from memory. And we did this 4 times in round 2. What we found, or what students found, and they really enjoy this activity. So I'll give you an activity that you can use, and you can, you can do this with a relative or a friend because it's fun the more people you have to talk about it with afterwards. What we found is that when we talked about their memory at work, I asked them what were some techniques that they used to help them remember. And what they were saying is that they may have found a picture within a picture. So it was really just a pattern. It wasn't really a picture. It was more of a pattern. And what they were finding was, oh, that looks like the sun, and that looks like a window. Someone said that reminded me of Call of Duty. So they were using associations in order to this new information, to hold on to this new information. They were bringing up prior knowledge or things that are important to them in order to save new information. I also want to say that chunking was part of the exercise because we broke up the larger pattern or picture into 4 pieces, and it was much more manageable for them to remember the smaller pieces than the bigger pieces. And we used just about the same amount of time. It was more effective for them with the smaller ones. Now, there was repetition in that the 4 smaller photos were the same photos that were in the original large one where they were all together. So there was repetition, and students were saying to themselves over and over and over again, speaking to themselves about what patterns were where. Some students planned what they were going to draw first, second, third, and fourth, and that was the order or organization of how they were going to go about remembering. And also just the willingness of students to go ahead and try this activity, to try a new technique. If one wasn't working, to try a new one. This is them using what they know and being able to just go for it. Now, when I was talking about semantic and visual encoding as being the 2 strongest forms of encoding, I did have a student who told herself that she saw the letter T, what letters she saw in the patterns. And I told her, you would have to already know what T means in order to say that looks like a T. So she was using semantic encoding as well as visual encoding by noticing she was telling herself the number 4 because she saw 4 of the same shape. And so in her mind's eye was seeing the number 4. So she did really well on this activity. The students who experience memory blocks, many of them well, first of all, weren't checking in with themselves. When we did check in, what we found was some of their attitudes were like, oh, this pattern is way too difficult. It's way too much of a challenge. I'm just not going to do it. Or I give up. This is really hard. And that attitude can keep us from properly encoding, um, and really learning something new, remembering something. Also, this was a great activity for Be Here Now, because some students were so busy trying to figure out what the objective of the activity was, or why they were doing such an activity, versus just going along with the activity and focusing on the shapes as they were asked. And this can really cause a block in memory, because we're not allowing any new information. In fact, we're not even listening. Um, Checking in physically, mentally to say, do I need water? Am I tired? Um, am I stressed out? Because those are all blocks as well to um, strengthening memory or using proper memory. And the last thing is that if the exercise wasn't of true value, meaning they weren't getting a grade for it, there was no high stakes um, involved in the activity, then students may not have really focused as purely as they can. So that's like us not knowing our true potential until we're pushed to the limit, right? So if I had told them that the activity was graded, we might have had very different outcomes, in that some students would be anxious and possibly not be able to remember as well. Some other students might be more motivated because that's how they operate and they want to make sure they get the points. So this activity just kind of brings up all the different methods or tools that we can use to help us remember. An activity that you can use at home would be setting out about 20 items, small items, on the floor or on a table, and setting the timer. And you go ahead and you can follow the pattern of 30 seconds. I'm sorry, of 90 seconds, to look at the items, and then you cover those items with a sheet. And what you can do is, rather than just putting out a few and not all of the items on the table, you can lift the towel or cloth from all 20 items and allow the viewer to spend another 30 seconds looking. And then, after they've done that, you give them another 30 seconds. And in between each time that they're looking at the items and that you're lifting the towel or cloth, you're giving them 30 seconds to write what they saw. You can even give them 15 seconds. It doesn't matter. The idea is that you're repeating the same, showing them over and over and over again what they've been looking at. It gets easier and easier for them to remember towards the end, especially because they're going to start to draw associations and make connections between all the items. So that concludes video 1 of 2 videos on memory. I hope you enjoyed yourself and learned something new, and I will be speaking to you very, very soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.